Hello there, one and all. If we shadows have offended, think but this, and all is mended, that you have but slumbered here, while these visions did appear, and this weak and idle theme, no more yielding but a dream. Gentles, do not reprehend, if you pardon, we will mend, and, as I am an honest puck, if we have unearned luck, now to scape the serpent's tongue, we will make amends ere long, else the puck a liar call, so good night unto you all. Give me your hands if we be friends, and Robin shall restore amends. Oh, when she's angry, she is keen and shrewd. She was a vixen when she went to school, and though she be but little, she is fierce. Good evening, one and all, and a very warm welcome to Hodge On Nodge. Joining me tonight, I have two men that are going to help us dissect whether this is indeed a mid-November managerial dream team that we've brought in. To my left, we have a face that all you Norwich fans will know pretty well, I imagine. That is the lovely Connor Southwell. Connor, how you doing, mate?
Hello, mate. Yeah, I enjoyed your Shakespearean monologue to open things off. I was actually in a production of King Lear back in school, so I don't know
who did you play?
Edmund, who was like the villain character. That was good fun.
Good
but
stuff.
that was all in Shakespearean. So yeah, that rang a little bit of a bell. Some of that, I think.
I'm going to try and commentate in iambic pentameter one day, like when I really want to raise the bar. Luke Hatfield is below me. Luke is someone that Norwich fans won't be so familiar with, but Luke is a man who has firsthand watched what Dean Smith and Craig Shakespeare have done at Aston Villa. Luke, and a good mate of mine for uni as well. So much in one package. How you doing, Luke?
Oh, not bad. Likewise with Connor. What an intro that was. I mean, it was certainly out of the realms of Dean Smith greatness from his time at Aston Villa. So yeah, fantastic.
So, I mean, I did that obviously because Craig Shakespeare's got the surname Shakespeare and William Shakespeare is the bard. But are these guys going to be the ones that can, I don't know, sonnet us to success and get us going somewhere? That is the big question, because I think earlier in the week I was blinded, we are on Sunday night now, Monday morning probably if you're listening to this in the podcast form. I'd talked myself into Frank Lampard. And I think I was blinded by the lights of it being Frank Lampard and thinking that was the right move. But I think when you package up Dean Smith and Shakespeare together, I like that better. Because I didn't even think of Dean Smith as coming with Craig Shakespeare. I just thought of it as Dean Smith in isolation. But this seems to be a nice marriage between the values that Norwich have bought, the attacking side of the game and building a dynamic, entertaining team with Dean Smith. And then Craig Shakespeare, who's great at a bit of the kind of more pragmatic sort of tactical approach. He definitely showed that in his time at Leicester. And a lot of people have said that he was the kind of tactical mastermind behind the Claudio Ranieri team that went on and won the league. So, I mean, you've seen them firsthand over the past few years at Villa, Luke. So talk to me about Dean Smith pre-Craig Shakespeare and then after Shakespeare came in as his assistant. What was the difference between the team, and what do you think these two men can bring to Norwich City?
Well, yeah, I mean, firstly, I was surprised to see Dean Smith jump back in so quickly. Or I mean, as things stand, I mean, it's not been officially announced yet, has it? Not.
It's not. No, but I think it will not be too long. I mean, I doubt it'll be tonight. Now we're getting on quite late, but
probably one for Monday morning. But I mean,
exactly.
It was a surprise because I thought after Dean Smith left Villa, that it was going to be one where he maybe sits down for 6 months, waits until he gets some time to recollect on what was ultimately a very successful time at Aston Villa. And in regards to your question, I mean, it's a strange one because Dean Smith pre-Craig Shakespeare, obviously, I mean, it was nothing but up for Aston Villa. Obviously, he came in with the club, mid-table in the Championship, not really doing much. Obviously, a fantastic squad and one which, should be performing and getting themselves promoted. And he came in and, he got off the start well. He got off to a start with a win against Swansea. But then Villa struggled a little bit, left, some good performances, some not so good. But it all kind of came together with the return of Jack Grealish from injury, and Dean Smith was, put together a bit of a managerial masterstroke, making him the captain, and it got the most out of him. And, the squad went on an unprecedented, historic 10-game winning run, which fired them right into the into the playoff spots and did the job on the big stage against Frank Lampard, funnily enough, in that playoff final. That first
it's interesting how the symmetry kind of goes in football sometimes, isn't it? And then the fact that, everyone was looking at the Lampard-Gerrard potential game that it was going to be. It's now going to be Dean Smith going back to his old team, facing his old team. So it's just funny, the symmetry in football sometimes, that all of these things wrapped up. The fact that Frank Lampard and Steven Gerrard, the two midfielders of their generation that Sven-Goran Eriksson couldn't manage to put in a team together to any great deal of success, but yet they have been inextricably linked throughout their career, and then they're both linked to clubs in the same day. It's just interesting, the symmetry you get in football sometimes.
Yeah, it writes itself, doesn't it? It's
exactly.
It's not something that just kind of never it fails to entertain. It always manages to link back up. But in regards to your original question, Dean Smith, it was nothing but ups. That first season in the Premier League was a little bit hairy, but again, he pulled it out of the bag late on. There was a point where Villa looked almost certain to go down, and those last run of games where they amassed enough points to survive by the skin of their teeth on the last day against West Ham, and then the season after speaks for itself, doesn't it? That season where Villa went and beat Liverpool 7-2 at Villa Park, and there were great results against other really big sides. And I think that was when we saw Dean Smith football at its pomp. And there were some changes in terms of the coaching setup, and Shakespeare came in, and it looked like things were continuing on. And Shakespeare, everyone knows the quality he brings, and he was a part of that management team that was so highly rated at Villa Park last season. But this year, I think it's been a situation of you've lost your talisman, you've lost your captain, and there are some question marks over how Dean Smith copes without Grealish. I think any manager would have struggled without him, to be honest. The impact they have.
It's almost like a bit similar to, and I know Villa fans haven't seen the best of Emi Buendia yet, but it's a bit similar to Norwich City losing Buendia. You lost the main sort of focus of your attacking axis, and I think Norwich struggled to kind of compensate for that for a long time. And no doubt, when you look back at Daniel Farke's reign as Norwich manager, the fact that Emi Buendia and Teemu Pukki provided that 1-2 punch will always be, and one of the criticisms you could level is Farke's winning ratio without Emi Buendia, which is pretty stark, the stats. But yeah, I think Dean Smith probably really struggled with losing Grealish, and so sometimes there's just the right time at a football club for a new voice to come in. It probably is that time at Villa, although I do think one result, and I do think he could have turned it round actually at Villa. But I also think sometimes, I think football's becoming a bit more short-termist all in, isn't it? Like more and more clubs are just seeing that a new voice can help more frequently, And I think, to be honest, I can kind of see the sense for Villa in making the change, regardless of what you think of Gerrard's an appointment, which the argument can be made. But for Norwich City, it strikes me that of all the candidates that were mentioned, and a lot has been made of the fact that he was Dean Smith was still in a post before Farke was sacked. But I think that's I don't think the two things are necessarily linked. Connor, just getting on to that actually. What's your kind of sort of envisioning of how this managerial chase has gone down? Because there's obviously been quite a lot of stories leaked. TalkSport already had Frank Lampard appointed, ended up very much with egg in their face coming out with that news, which obviously, given the way TalkSport have treated Norwich City this season, but what's your kind of view on the way that the managerial chase has been conducted? Do you think Norwich City have ended up with the best candidate for the job? Do you think they've ended up with the preferred candidate for the job? Well, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, yes to both. And to be fair to the club, even sort of on probably the day after Daniel Farke was sacked, it was always kind of this weekend as a timeline that they saw as getting their man in. So they were always going to do the sort of due diligence and do the process properly and speak to the relevant people. To be honest, I think people there's been, and I've seen them myself, tweets going, "Oh well, Smith was already in a post when Daniel Farke was sacked, so he couldn't have been the preferred candidate, or he couldn't have been the choice." I think Norwich had a plan once Daniel Farke was dismissed. I think Dean Smith's availability changed that pretty rapidly, to be honest. Someone that that Stuart Webber knows well, likes. I think John Percy reported yesterday that, which is something that I didn't know actually, that he held talks with him to be Huddersfield manager in 2015. So it's clearly
that's interesting.
a connection going back a little bit. So, yeah, I would say that Smith's availability probably changed their plans. But as soon as his availability was clear and it was clear that he was interested in the job, I think Norwich City had their eyes set on one candidate, really, which is quite interesting given the way it's all panned out, as you mapped out there with Frank Lampard and whatnot. Stuart Webber managed to squeeze in a face-to-face meeting with Dean Smith before he left to go to New York to visit his son. Obviously, everyone's seen the reports about him interviewing well. I think, having watched a few videos of him yesterday speaking about culture and his ideas and stuff like that, I think it's pretty clear to see why. And then I think sort of late Thursday, Friday, Saturday and today has been about finalising the small details with an announcement set for probably tomorrow morning, I would suggest, but definitely tomorrow. So, yeah, in terms of the timeline they've set, and I understand why it looks a bit chaotic, but they've certainly met their own targets with this appointment.
Well, do you know what's a nice thing about it is it proves that there was no cloak and dagger going on when Daniel Farke was still in charge. It proves that Norwich City have gone about the process the right way. And even if you think it was harsh sacking a manager after the first win of the season, I mean, I would maintain that Norwich City would already be facing relegation if they did not make a head coaching change. So I think it was the right move, but I also think it shows that Stuart Webber's not gone behind Farke's back in any way. Everything's been done above board, and they're now going through the process of trying to find a manager. And to be honest, they're turning it round at the right time during the international break. And we're ending up with a candidate. And my last podcast, I totally talked myself into Frank Lampard. And now I've totally talked myself into Dean Smith. And I think it's the combination of the two of them. And sorry, Luke, I'm maybe cut across your answer, mate, but I'm really interested in that dynamic because I think everyone's aware of Craig Shakespeare for his work at Leicester. And it's interesting that he chose to take the step back to become an assistant. Did he ever sort of allude to why that was? Does he just prefer being in the background rather than the head coach role? Or is there any particular reason for that?
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of of preference for him. I mean, obviously he took on the role at Leicester and things didn't go to plan really in terms of the success that they'd had. Obviously the great success that they'd had the season before, and I think he maybe sees himself as happier behind the scenes as a coach. Not the man who's one under fire when things aren't necessarily going particularly great. And I think it suits him as well as the clubs that maybe look at him. With Villa, for example, it was a case where they wanted to add to their coaching staff, and Dean Smith was looking for the right person, and obviously Craig Shakespeare, if he's a name who's available or someone that you really want to get a hold of and agrees to go to that club, he's obviously a great pickup. And I think for Norwich, it'll be a fantastic coaching team. I think you were right in saying that football's a little bit cyclical. Dean Smith he spent his time at Villa and he'd obviously been fantastic, but the fans didn't want it to get toxic for Dean, and it never did that, which was great because obviously he's got deep line connections with the club. It's quite well known that his dad was a steward and that. So it was great to see that. And for Craig, I think it'll be a good opportunity to work with Dean Smith again and do it at a club and hopefully keep Norwich up, because that will be the main aim this season, won't it?
Well, yeah. Do you think, from sort of, you're obviously a bit of an outsider here and we're in amongst it all the time. What's your take on it from the outside? Do you think that squad is decent enough to be kept up, for number one? And number two, do you think Smith and Shakespeare between them can contrive to do that?
Well, I certainly think Smith and Shakespeare can do it. I mean, we saw it with Villa when they were really in a creek without a paddle, and they managed to get them out of it. Or Dean Smith managed to do that, and it's one of those where with Norwich, I look at it from the outside. I do have reservations about the squad, but I wonder why the likes of Billy Gilmore and the likes of Todd Cantwell haven't been playing, because those are two obviously very talented footballers. Gilmore in particular has been fantastic. North of the border.
Love the boy, mate.
You just wonder why he's not getting
mate. He was in Moldova the other night, and there was, for Scotland's first goal, you basically saw him telling Nathan Patterson, make a run inside. He plays it to John McGinn. John McGinn flicks it on, and then Patterson finishes for the goal. And then the second goal was majestic. John McGinn's back heel lives up to the song. He has Steve Clark's Zidane. And Scotland are actually fun to watch. It's as if I'm living in a parallel universe. But I think that's the thing for me. Billy Gilmore, Todd Cantwell, all of these names are going to immediately be brought back into the throng. And that, Connor, that's got to be something for Norwich in particular, that must have been a big focus area when they were thinking, right, it's time to move on as manager. Because if you're playing a system that neutralises your ability to use a lot of the players, if you're playing, if there's, I always see it as, I've explained this in a couple other places, football is a series of football manager screens. Daniel Farkas had a couple of private chats that have not gone well, and he's ended up with Todd Cantwell playing with the under-23s, Billy Gilmore not playing, whether that's for tactical reasons or for whatever else. But having a new manager come in, and it's almost like new signings again, isn't it?
It is. And I think Todd Cantwell's interesting because he's a player that Dean Smith liked when he was at Aston Villa. I think that's a pretty open secret at this stage. And obviously Milo Rashica was someone that Aston Villa tried to sign summer before last. So they're two players there that I think he'll be extremely excited to work with. Billy Gilmore as well. And I think what's interesting, Christos Solis, obviously you can throw into that. I think it's really exciting to see how he goes about molding that into an effective team. But I think you look at the way Norwich City have looked at this kind of pursuit for a head coach. Dean Smith, Frank Lampard, Gatil Knudsen, they all sort of play a 4-3-3, 4-2-3-1. And that is kind of the squad of players that Norwich City have. Is the squad of players that they recruited for in the summer. So it's clear they want a manager to come and deliver that. And I think
Absolutely.
given the pool of managers that they're shopping in, they're obviously not in the elite tier. They're probably not even in the tier after the elite. I think given kind of the way it's spinning around at the moment, this sort of managerial merry-go-round, there's maybe even an argument to suggest that Norwich have come off better than a lot of the other teams. So yeah, it's a fascinating dynamic. It's a clean slate. From what I understand, Todd Cantwell's already back in the fold with the first team, so that's probably not particularly a surprise to anyone. And as Smith takes training early part of next week, Tuesday probably, I would suggest, when the bulk of players return, it's going to be an opportunity for everyone to impress and state their claim again. And I'm sure that we'll probably see names reintroduced that maybe we haven't seen for a little while. Hopefully Billy Gilmore's one of those, as you point out, because he's a fantastic talent. And I think if Norwich City do want to survive this season, then it's going to be getting the best out of players like Billy Gilmore and Todd Cantwell that's going to be pivotal to that.
Him and Stormin Norman as a 6 and an 8 is just so exciting to me. I really want to see us do that. You mentioned about the 4-3-3 and the 4-2-3-1. Luke, do you think, because I know Smith in his time has used both systems efficaciously, do you think he's got a personal preference, or do you think he'll kind of mould that into the squad that he's got? And for Norwich City fans that are maybe, I don't think there'll be that many of them, but for anyone that's not aware of his work and the way these teams go about things, how would you describe the style of football?
Well, the best of Dean Smith football that you'll see is either in a 4-2-3-1 or a 4-3-3, and let's be honest, they are very similar formations. But yeah, you'll see a very expansive, style of play under Dean. He likes to keep the ball on the floor, really, nice, attractive football with an attacking focus. But obviously, with one eye on the back door as well. Villa, they came into the Premier League and they were maybe a little bit naive. They thought they could, run games like they did in the Championship. And that wasn't quite the case.
We've seen that in full evidence as well.
Yeah, I remember some memorable games for Norwich. The last time they came up, obviously that win over Man City was one which I think everyone, looks back on pretty fondly if you're in the green and yellow. But ultimately it'll be an expansive style of play. And I think Dean Smith will revert to that. I think where it's gone downhill for him is where this season, he signed some players for Villa. You've got Danny Ings and Ollie Watkins. He was adamant that he wanted to play them as a strike partnership, which was obviously, you can't do that in a 4-3-3 or 4-2-3-1. And I think that was his downfall. He got maybe a little bit lost and he never really discovered his best 11. It'll be nice for him to reset with the Norwich City squad. And like Connor touched on, I'm really keen to see how he handles Milo Rashica, because he's a player that he was really keen on at Villa. And it didn't work out. Unfortunately, I couldn't get that deal over the line. But I'm really intrigued to see, because I've not really seen too much of Rashica this season. But by all accounts, he's maybe not hit the ground running in the way that you might have hoped that he would have. I think Dean Smith might be able to get the best out of him, and the likes of Camwell and Gilmore, they're quality players, and there are some exciting players there, and I'm sure they'll take well to Dean Smith football.
What about so you're mentioning Rashica there, but I'm trying to think of when Dean Smith first went in at Villa. What was his initial impact like? Was he someone that immediately managed to kind of lift the level of the team, change the style, really put his own mark and his own imprint on it?
Yeah, well, that was the big thing that he had to do, really, because he came in, he followed him from Steve Bruce, and let's be honest, Steve Bruce football is very different to that of Dean Smith's. But he came in. It took him a little while to do it, but obviously it's such a dynamic shift from Bruce ball to Smith ball. It's not going to be something that happens overnight. But he came in, and he had a very talented squad. I'll give him that. But at the same time, he did manage to implement that style of play. And it took a while for results to come, but when he finally got his team fully fit and playing to his standards, then it was nothing but good performances, really. Like I said, he brought the team from, I think it was 14th in the Championship to 10 player spots with that miraculous 10-game winning run, which was it was scintillating stuff throughout. And Villa didn't look like conceding, and they looked like scoring 2 or 3 every game, which was obviously fantastic.
So you mentioned he was keen on Milot Rashica. The Villa recruitment team couldn't get the deal over the line. Stuart Webber has obviously, over his time at Norwich City, managed to get a lot of deals over the line, including, by to all intents and purposes, the looks of it, this managerial one. But what do you know about the relationship between them, Connor, Webber and Smith? Do you know much about that? And do you think it might be encouraging for Dean Smith to come in and work with someone who is so shrewd in the market as Stuart Webber is?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting one, because I was kind of looking back through some quotes from 2019 about Stuart Webber, and it was actually about why they decided to recruit Daniel Farke at the time that they did. And it came back to 3 things: developing young players, playing an attractive style of play, and being sort of open to different ideas in the transfer market. Dean Smith's done all 3 in kind of the short time that he's been in management, whether that's at Walsall, Brentford or Villa. Walsall, he had to be very creative, I think, and with the way they recruited. Brentford obviously recruit in a very clever way. And Villa, he's worked under 2 different sporting directors. So that's a big tick there. He was head of youth at Walsall. He's given a lot of players debuts across the year. There's a few even this season at Villa who have had more minutes than perhaps they would have done under someone else. And then, as Luke speaks about there, the style of play. So he ticks all of those boxes, really. In terms of their relationship, as I said, if this is someone who was interviewed for a job that Stuart Webber was trying to recruit for back in 2015, then it's clear that he's had a long admiration of Smith and what he does in football. So that's a positive. He would have spoken to him before. He would have known what he's like. He would have seen his Aston Villa team in the Premier League. So I think the relationship will be a positive one. And equally, Dean Smith was in charge pretty much of creating the culture that Walsall became. He's essentially turned them into a side that was challenging at the top end of League One. You can see after his departure, the direction that it's gone for them. Brentford as well, he improved, and Aston Villa he improved. He's a builder of football clubs. I think that is probably the best way to describe him. He progresses football clubs, and that's probably what Norwich City need now. That Daniel Farke has built them up. Dean Smith can now do the next bit. I think he's good enough to do the next bit. He's got experience of doing the next bit with Aston Villa, and that's probably where he differs from Daniel Farke. So I think it's a sensible appointment. I think he'll work well within the structure for the reasons that I explained, and I think Stuart Webber will really be looking forward to him injecting some fresh impetus and new ideas into it, because I spent my morning yesterday watching quite a few interviews with him talking about different things, and a very deep thinker about football, and also quite philosophical in his outlook about football, quite modern, quite progressive. I think often he kind of gets pictured as a bit old school for whatever reason, and I don't get the impression that he is. Maybe little bits of his management style, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. And one thing he is very good with people, and he gets the best out of people. And Norwich have a young group. He will need to do that. He'll need them all on his side if Norwich are to do what looks at the moment very, very difficult. So it's a very difficult job that he's walking into. But I think they've got a man who is probably the best fit for it at the moment, I would say.
Yeah, of the available candidates, I would completely agree. Yeah, I mean, you touched on it there. Good with people, Luke. Any good stories from his time at Villa, and just in that kind of score of how he's kind of dealt with people, whether that be members of the public within the dressing room. So yeah, I suppose in a kind of public-facing side, and then maybe internally in the man management side, is there any sort of stories or stuff maybe that illustrates what he kind of does in that regard?
Well, I mean, in terms of the public, he was adored by Villa fans, Dean, and still is.
One of their own, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. But it's not just that. It's not just that he's a fan. It's the fact that every game, Villa fans would queue up outside the gates at Villa Park, hoping to see a player or manager or just someone stop by. And Dean was always very very gracious, very generous with his time for fans. He'd take pictures, as you'd expect from any manager. But with him, it was always very much a joy, for anyone to speak with him. And likewise, like Connor mentioned, he's got a really good mentality. The way he speaks about the game is fantastic as a fan as well. He's someone who is very forward thinking, and it's great. Fans enjoy that when they hear a manager who talks in that respect, because it's not just a matter of it was a game of 2 halves, this and that. It's a very progressive talk, which is always good. In terms of behind the scenes, I mean, you only need to look at the players' reaction. He was well loved by pretty much the entire squad, I'd imagine. You look at the likes of Tyrone Mings, who is his skipper, and his
turned him into an England player, didn't he?
Well, that's it. And you only need to look at Jack Grealish as well. I mean, he came in, he was a Championship player, admittedly, one which I think everyone knew could do a job in the Premier League, but that's the story of, he went down with that shin injury in the Championship, and then he came back, and the way that Dean Smith managed him, he's essentially, people use Jack Grealish as a stick to beat Dean Smith with at times, because they say, well, you can't do it without Grealish. He's never managed it without Grealish. I look at it in the respect of, he took Jack Grealish and he got the best out of him, which you can see now at Man City.
Turned the guy into a superstar.
Exactly. Pep Guardiola's not exactly getting the best out of Jack Grealish, I think it's fair to say. And Dean Smith managed to do that. And you look elsewhere. I mean, for example, a player like Conor Hourihane, who isn't even at the club at the moment. He's out on loan at Sheffield
He's
United.
a swear word to Norwich City fans, Luke. Always
He may well be.
Brilliant games against the Canaries, man.
Yeah, he may well be. But, I mean, for a player who's out on loan, hasn't got a future at Villa by all accounts, to send such a loving message to a manager who essentially said to him, you're not going to feature for this club anymore. It says everything about his man management skills. So, players, I think every Norwich City player can really look forward to working with Dean Smith, because he's someone who clearly gets on with everyone at the club and is a great man manager. So if I was a Norwich City player, I'd be very excited.
Well, that's good to hear. A lot of the fans are really getting behind him as well, I think now. Katie Lee's written, I never thought we'd be able to tempt Dean Smith. Think about it. He must have got a nice payoff. Probably looking forward to, a bit of time off and maybe a bit more time seeing his son in America. But she continues to come to Norwich this soon after being sacked from his boyhood club. That shows drive and passion. I'm excited. Dan Mayhew says, I'm so happy we did not get Lampard. Overrated. Don't understand the reaction from some to Dean Smith. He was great for Brentford, Villa and Walsall. I'm sure he'll do well for us. Great at youth development too. And there's a few other comments in there just really getting behind the new boss and sort of quite encouraging to see the swell of support that there has been. I think since it's looked like it's going to be Dean Smith, I think a few people that did have their crosshairs on Lampard seem to have realigned them. I am amongst them. And it's now as if, I think I was just excited by Lampard and kind of carried away in the hype of it, whereas I now do think this is probably rationally the most sensible appointment. But bringing it on to Craig Shakespeare again, do you think Norwich City will really be able to benefit, Connor, from a guy who is so tactically good on the other side of the ball, the side of the ball where we've really struggled in the Premier League? Because I know we're not scoring many goals, but if we can keep them out, then that would be a start, and not taking away the 2 clean sheets that got us the couple of 0-0 draws earlier this season. But I think Norwich City have probably really needed someone in that really knows the defensive side of the ball for a while now, I think. And I'm really excited to see what he can bring alongside Smith. What about you?
Yeah, agreed. I looked into him a bit yesterday for a piece that I wrote this morning, and I mean, you have to sort of look at his experience at the top level. You don't stay at that level unless you're a very, very good coach, and he's worked with some talented managers as well. He's worked at England, he's worked at Everton, he's worked obviously at Aston Villa, Leicester City, some massive football clubs. Hull, maybe less so in terms of size, but whilst they're in the Premier League, so I mean he's got experience of it all, hasn't he? He's got experience of winning the Premier League. He's got experience of being in relegation tussles as well, and I think the dynamic is probably quite an exciting one because they have probably what Daniel Farke didn't, top flight experience in abundance, the pair of them, and as you say, I think Shakespeare will bring a fresh pair of eyes and a different approach that Norwich City probably need. The thing that excites me both, though, they're just both very talented coaches, among probably the best English managers in the country at the moment. And I think that probably shows by just how few are in the Premier League at present. So that can only be a good thing for Norwich City as well. The fact that both have wanted to come, as you say, after they were sacked by Villa last week, I think shows a lot about their.
It's a really short gap. And actually, funnily enough, this is a Villa-related stat, Luke. I think it's the shortest time between two managerial jobs other than John Gregory back in the day. I think it was between Villa and Derby. He was, I can't remember the exact period of time, but I think Smith and Shakespeare are going to beat that record in terms of time between leaving a Premier League job and taking a new one. Again, the symmetry of football, mate.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's great to see him jump back in. I was one who, like I said earlier, I thought that it might be 6 months, it might be the end of the season until he jumps back in. But clearly he's got that drive, and the Norwich job must really reach out to him because like I said, some of the players there, there's a squad there that I think Dean Smith will believe can stay up, and he'll hope to get some back in to be able to do that. But like Connor said, he's an incredibly gifted coach, as is Craig Shakespeare. So if anyone can get the best out of some of those players, I think it's going to be him.
Sorry, just to pick up on that, I think what it does do as well from Norwich's squad perspective now, there's nowhere to hide. There's no excuses now. The head coach is gone. You can't blame that. Is this group of players good enough now? They've got to prove it under a new head coach, and I think that's probably a different question mark than what they would have had under Daniel Farke. And I think an element of why Norwich City decided to sack Daniel Farke, and it was Stuart Webber outlined it in their statement, is because they believe they can stay in the Premier League this time. I think it was just injecting some shock into the squad as much as anything else to prove that actually they're not happy with the starts of the season and they're not happy with the performances or the results. So if Dean Smith and Craig Shakespeare can't inject that, then I think that will probably say a lot about the group of players and the recruitment that Norwich City have undergone this summer.
It's quite nice that, I mean, obviously the sheets of examples already been outlined, but I think it's quite nice to be getting a manager in that likes quite a lot of the players in the squad. Clearly Norwich City have, I mean, they've obviously been coveting some Aston Villa players with Buendia going there, obviously, but I think Dean Smith was always quite an admirer of the work that Daniel Farke was doing and the kind of football that Norwich City played and the football and philosophy that we have at the football club. So it's good to get someone in that is very much in alignment with that, I think, firstly. And secondly, I'm really excited to see what he does with players, which players really push on under him. Because I back 2 or 3 of those summer signings that we've not really seen the best of yet to really end up hitting their stride under this new boss. And I think that's going to be good to see. Is there anyone you think, Connor, that you would maybe pick out as most likely to do that?
Oh, good question.
There's
probably two answers. There's probably 2 answers. The one I'd like to see do it, and then maybe the one I think will do it. For me, Brandon Williams is a really interesting one because we've seen probably 2 really outstanding performances from him so far, which was Arsenal away, and obviously most recently at Brentford, where I thought he was very good. So if Dean Smith can achieve a consistency in his performances this season, then we're probably not even having a debate whether it's him or Yanulis, I think. And so he's the one I think probably will kick on. The one that I want to see kick on rather is Christos Solis, who we haven't seen much of. There's so much hype and excitement about. And
There is. I did a podcast about him, mate, with a guy who's been watching him since he was a young teenager in Greece, and he said like proper potential world-class footballer there, and we've seen very little of that player. But I don't think he's really had the stage to do it on. He's been shoehorned into positions he's never played before. He's never really got a full run in the team playing in his best position. So, yeah, I'm with you. Jolis is the one I'm really excited about. Him and Billy Gilmore actually playing well in the team. And the re-emergence of Cantwell, potentially.
Yeah, well, that was what I was going to come on to. I'm sure Luke will tell the story about when Dean Smith walked into Aston Villa and what he said to Jack Grealish. Your numbers aren't good enough. I would imagine he'll be having a very similar conversation with Todd Cantwell because the ability's there. It's now up to him if he wants to reach the top level. He needs to start adding and getting his numbers up, essentially, particularly in the Premier League. So I think he'll try and use a very similar style of management that he used with Jack Grealish with Todd Cantwell. I mean, the narrative is similar. It's not the same, and I'm certainly not comparing Todd Cantwell to Jack Grealish in terms of quality. But local lad, hometown club, maybe underperforming a little bit, been out of the team a little bit.
I think the parallels are there, mate. Yeah. It's a good point. Any thoughts on that, Luke? Do you think he can maybe be the guy to unlock that next level with Cantwell?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, the parallels, as you said, I mean, they've even got the same haircut. I mean, it's pretty spectacular.
Your beard's been getting some love in the comments, mate, by the way.
Oh, well, that's always appreciated. Unfortunately, the hair isn't quite at Grealish levels, is it?
No, quite, but I don't know if that's by choice or not, so I can't criticise.
A bit of both, I'm going to be honest. Braved the shave before I was forced to. Anyway, I mean, in regards to Cantwell, it is going to be a case of, will Cantwell be Dean Smith's new Jack Grealish? And like Connor touched on, I mean, the similarities are all there. He's a player who's clearly very talented. He's a player that Dean Smith clearly liked the look of as Villa boss. He was linked with him, on numerous occasions, which didn't come as a surprise because we've seen the best of Cantwell, in the Championship. And first season Norwich were in the Premier League, 2 seasons ago. He was obviously a player who was very highly rated. But, as Connor touched on, with Dean Smith, when he came into Villa, he immediately kind of highlighted Jack Grealish and said, look, you've got to perform. And I think he'll do exactly the same with Todd Cantwell. And I think he'll do it with a couple of other players at Norwich. I've already touched on Rashid, so I think he's one that could thrive under him. Another player, I think, might be able to stand out under Dean Smith, someone like Josh Sargent, who, has come in and he was really highly rated.
Interesting.
He's one of those players. People look at Norwich and they say, outside of Timu Pukki, they needed another striker, and Josh Sargent can play there. So I'm interested to see what he does with some of them talented young players, because there are so many of them at Norwich. You just need to get a tune out of them, and if you can manage that, then they could really give some big teams some bloody noses and obviously stay up in the Premier League if they can put a run of results together. Of course, if things don't go to plan, then you've got no one better to get you, immediately bouncing back.
That's the key bit for me as well, right? See, in comparison to comparison to Dean Smith versus Frank Lampard, credentials wise, Frank Lampard, I think he'd get his top 6, but I don't know if he'd get his top 2. Dean Smith, I think, would get us promoted again, and I think the football club would not suffer. I mean, we probably wouldn't get Matthias Norman, would be the big blow as a Norwich City fan. I don't know if we could get that over the line if we return to the Championship, whereas the clause is there. If we stay in the Premier League, then Matthias Norman will remain at Norwich City. So I think that's going to be the one big disappointment. But Dean Smith will get us back out of the Championship, and that's the key thing for me, is looking at this appointment as let's say 3-4 years is a good tenure for a manager now. If we look at the next 3-4 years of the football club, I'm happy with Dean Smith as the manager. We've got a few questions coming in. First one I'll hit to you, Connor. Will he have any money to spend in January, asks Lee Coates. It'll probably be money spent on his behalf, by the sporting director, Stuart Webber. But is there money available for recruitment in January if Smith identifies any areas as particularly needing reinforcements?
Well, unless the plan has drastically changed, I don't think that January is going to be particularly busy, unless Dean Smith has got some assurances from Norwich City sporting director, to be honest. And it's a month that Stuart Webber doesn't particularly like to do business in. I think there's an opportunity maybe for 1 or 2. It's certainly not for sort of financial reasons, but it's already quite a big squad that Norwich have got.
Yeah.
Are there one or two areas that I think you'd like another? Yeah, for sure. Maybe they could have a play about with the loans. Billy Gilmore is someone we're talking about. Obviously, his loan future is up for debate. If Smith comes in and for whatever reason decides actually Daniel Farke was right, then that is certainly something that they could explore, and then that could be an option that opens itself up. So, look, never say never, but as things stand, I don't expect Norwich City to be too busy in January now.
Okie dokie. Jeff Lindell's asking, will Smith help us keep some players that we may have lost in January? I'll let you field that one, Luke.
I mean, how does he mean in terms of players we may have lost in January?
So guys that might be potentially heading for the exit door. So Billy Gilmore would be an obvious one going back to Chelsea because he's not getting game time on his loan. But maybe you could look at the likes of, say, a Max Aarons, who's been linked with some of the biggest clubs in the world, to be honest. Guys that may be headed for an exit. Do you think Dean Smith could be the guy to twist their arm and say, do you know what, see the season out with us and maybe get a big move in the summer? Essentially, player retainment rather than player recruitment.
Well, I mean, we saw that with Villa from his time there. He managed to keep Jack Grealish at the club, long before many other fans, maybe kind of accepted that he was going to be on his way. So he's certainly got the capability of doing that. I think the one thing that will really, help players who are maybe considering their future in January will be his coaching style and his clear, brilliant man management, which we touched on already. He obviously knows how to keep players happy. That's not to say that he won't show someone the door when they need to be, but ultimately he's done a good job at keeping the majority of Villa's squad very happy. You only need to look at players, someone like Courtney Hawes, for example, he's never going to be a starting centre back, but every time he comes in, he does a good job. And it's clear that he likes doing that job for Dean Smith. He's someone who accepts his role, and he's great at getting players to do that. So you can certainly you can certainly hang your hat on that he'll be able to keep players happy and hopefully give them an opportunity to shine.
Well, that's good to know. He's a question in from Mr. Radio Floyd. He's asking, what lineup would you like to see, 4-3-3 or 4-2-3-1? Which was he more successful with at Villa, Luke?
Well, that last season where during the coronavirus pandemic and no fans were around, it was a 4-2-3-1. But like I said, you're splitting hairs between a 4-3-3 and a 4-2-3-1 for me.
Yeah, that's true.
But ultimately, he likes having those three attacking players. He likes them to press really high. I mean, someone like Ollie Watkins obviously shines under him. He's a player that he's used at numerous clubs now. He likes to have that focal point in terms of someone who will, instigate the press from really high. Jack Grealish speaks for himself in terms of the quality he had. And on that right flank, we saw a number of players there. The likes of Anwar Ghazi, we saw Bertrand Traore do really well. The midfield is obviously key. John McGinn is obviously a fantastic player, but we've really seen him develop under Smith. And then,
best backside in football, mate.
Yeah, he certainly does do. But then we saw, the emergence of young talent as well. Jacob Ramsey, he had a really good season under Dean Smith, and we saw him really develop, and he's turning into a fantastic player. We've seen him doing the job at youth levels for England now as well, which is showing the quality that he's really built under Dean Smith. So, it bodes well if you've got young talent with Dean Smith and Craig Shakespeare about, because he'll give them an opportunity and they'll hope that they can shine under him. Okie
dokie. Another one which I'll let you field. Look, do you think that you might target anyone to bring back from Villa on loan in January? David Berman asking that one.
It's an interesting one. You look at that Villa squad, and we're yet to see what Steven Gerrard thinks of the squad as well. So it's tough to say.
That's true.
Steven Gerrard may fancy a lot of these players. He might not fancy others. There's a real question mark at the moment over someone like Tyrone Mings, who despite playing for England, a lot of Villa fans, or there's been a growing group of Villa fans who are maybe thinking he's someone that needs to be replaced. And
he's not. I don't think he's an England standard defender. I think he had some really good games actually for England, but I don't think, given the level that England want to be competing at and were viably competing at during the Euros, I don't think he's an answer there.
Yeah, I think a lot of Villa fans are starting to question that as well. So he is maybe one that, Villa signed him for a lot of money, and I'm not saying that Norwich are going to go out and sign, Tyrone Mings, but it's one where if Steven Gerrard maybe fancies an upgrade there, then it could be one who's potentially, maybe considered available in some time in the future. But outside of that, you look at the squad and you think the Villa squad is it's a little bit big, but at the same respect, you've got to see what Steven Gerrard makes of that squad before he even considers letting anyone go.
There might be 2 or 3 that he just doesn't fancy, and that they could be viable transfer candidates maybe for Norwich City. But just on the subject of young defenders, actually, Norwich City have Andrew Omobamidele, who's put in some superb performances already this season. So, mentioning Tyrone Mings, I think I'd rather play Andrew Omobamidele there. Don't know if that puts me in the stark minority, but I would rather develop a player like that than bring in Tyrone Mings, whose eventual levels maybe about here. Omobamidele's could be there. So I would rather develop the younger talent. And one of the questions was asking Connor, can he cement his place in the team as a regular right now? Do you think that he's got the gumption to do that, the young man? And do you think he can do?
Yeah, I do. I think he's tremendous. I watched him against Brentford. It's not like you're watching a 19-year-old kid, really. He's brilliant. He's got size, stature, physicality. He's got a turn of pace as well. Reads the game expertly. I've got really high hopes for him. I think if you compare him to someone, Ben Godfrey's probably the obvious example because we saw his development. I think if you compare the two at the same age, I think Omobamidele is well ahead of where Ben Godfrey.
Yeah, he's a better defender. Godfrey's 3 different things in one player: a ball playing centre half, a kind of sitting midfielder, and a right back who has settled on the ball playing centre half bit, but I think Omobamidele's a much better defender than Ben Godfrey, and I'm a big Ben Godfrey fan, by the way. But I just think Omobamidele's superb. I'm with you.
Agreed. Yeah, I think the interesting one for me is someone like Grant Hanley. Where does he fit into a Dean Smith side? Would he fit into a Dean Smith side? He obviously had a lot of capital with Daniel Farke. He's a big presence in the group. That's going to be an interesting one to see. Someone like Christoph Zimmermann. I mean, he's someone who was attached to Daniel Farke. He arrived with Daniel Farke. What's going to be made of him? So I think there's a lot of question marks around those 2 centre-back positions. If it is going to be a 4, I know Dean Smith played a 3-5-2 at Villa, didn't he? With maybe not the same level of success, but so that's again maybe a different option for him to use. But
he is tactically adaptable. That's another thing that really encourages me with him coming in as a manager. But he has primarily an attacking philosophy, whereas Farke kind of lost that, I think, towards the end. So yeah, that's another just exciting aspect about Dean Smith. But I'll let you finish your point, mate.
Yeah, so I was just going to finish on Omobamidele. Then there's also the element as well. Norwich City, the way they run the football club, and I'm sure Dean Smith will know this, is they need to develop young players because then they need to get a big sum of cash for them to keep the self-funding model going. So I really believe if you could establish Andrew Omobamidele as a Premier League defender, I don't think it would be long before we see him in a similar position to maybe someone like Ben White or something like that. I mean, he's still incredibly young, so you got to be cautious. But look, if you get a good body of games in the Premier League, people are going to look at you at that age, I think, irrespective of your potential and stuff. But yeah, I think based on what I've seen so far, I think he could definitely stake his claim and be a more consistent member of that back 4, particularly if he can replicate the level of performance we saw against Brentford.
Yeah, look, on the subject of Omobamidele, let's talk developing young defenders. Dean Smith's done that well at every club he's been at, I think.
Yeah, and the standout, at Villa was Ezri Konsa. He was signed, admittedly for pretty big money, but I mean he wasn't the starting centre back when that first Premier League game. It was coming around for Villa. It was Mings and it was Bjorn Engels. Ezri Konsa was someone who obviously developed under Dean Smith and has become for what many Villa fans are wondering, why isn't he getting an England call up and Tyrone Mings is? And obviously the question mark there is Tyrone Mings is a left footer and Ezri Konsa isn't. But he's been a fantastic asset for Villa, and he's obviously ballooned in value. And his quality is there for all to see. He's a fantastic young defender and someone who's going to continue to improve. Not to mention the likes of Matty Targett and Matty Cash, both of whom were signed, and it took Targett a little while, but he was Villa's player of the season last year. That goes to show just how good he was.
Never have thought that. Like, is that Matty Targett?
Yeah, he was. I think he was player's player. So it was it was one where he really shone under Dean Smith, and that's obviously not just defensively, but going forward. And then Matty Cash he's just earned his first Poland call up. Admittedly, he's switched allegiances, but he's someone who's really shining at right back as well. And then it was a tricky one in terms of the goalkeeper, but Dean Smith eventually got the man that he wanted, and Emi Martinez has really shone as well. So defensively, he certainly knows how to get a tune out of players, and particularly young players in the likes of Ezri Konsa. But he's someone who can develop that talent as well. He doesn't need money to be able to get players playing at a higher level. He can do it on the coaching pitch too.
Sorry, can I ask Luke a question? A bit of a change of tack. I was just going to ask him about strikers. I mean, you mentioned Ollie Watkins earlier on and how he likes to press. What do you think Dean Smith, and you mentioned Josh Sargent as well, what do you think Dean Smith will do with someone like Teemu Pukki, who's a very different striker to someone like Ollie Watkins?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, he's someone who's certainly shone at Premier League level. I don't know how Dean Smith already takes to him. It's interesting because Villa did sign Danny Ings, and you'd say Ings and Pukki aren't too dissimilar in the style of player that they are they? I mean, they're both born finishers. So we never really saw the best of Ings under Dean. We did see him shine at the start of the season. I think that the goal against Newcastle was one which I think stood out. But it'd be interesting to see how he manages Teemu Pukki, because, like you said, he's a very different striker to Ollie Watkins, and we'll see how he copes. Because Dean Smith, he had a couple strikers at Villa who were very, very different. I mean, if you remember, he signed Wesley that first Premier League season, and that was one which got curtailed by injury, but he had Tammy Abraham before that, so he can clearly work with a range of different strikers. It just depends on how he takes to the methods that Dean Smith wants to implement. I'm sure Teemu Pukki will be keen to work with him, but it'll be an interesting one to see.
I'll be interested to see tactically if maybe Smith adapts the kind of the way the team moves going forward and the approach in that area of the pitch to what Teemu Pukki's strengths are. I suspect in the short term he'll probably kind of have to, because he is the best viable option there. And I think a few Norwich City fans' noses would be out of joint if he decided to go with Josh Sargent. I can't even speak, as a target man, and then rather than playing with Teemu. But I think in January, that's the one area that I think a lot of people would maybe like to see Norwich City get someone in as another number 9 option. And even though Stuart Webber doesn't necessarily like buying players at that time of year, would it make sense to go for like a 6-month loan deal? Someone that can maybe come in and even get 5 goals. 5 goals is it's a lot for Norwich City in terms of trying to stay in the division. So do you think that's a kind of move that might make sense and could potentially happen, Connor?
Yeah, quite possibly. I mean, they've maxed out their loan spots at the moment, though, so it would mean sort of fiddling around with one and looking at it again. So that is the interesting element for me, just about how they go about that, because clearly you're not going to get rid of Norman. I think Kabak as well, I think has got the tools there to be quite a really exciting player. Whether or not we see that this season or not is going to be interesting, but still very young. I think Dean Smith's view of him is going to be particularly interesting. And then obviously domestically, you've got Brandon Williams and Billy Gilmore. So I can see all 4 playing a pretty major part under Dean Smith, if I'm being really honest. So that then means that you have to go and spend on a striker pretty big money. We've seen what £8 million gets you in Josh Sargent, which is arguably a striker who's not really good enough for the level. So to then ask Norwich to go again in January, when there's probably going to be a real prospect of them getting relegated back to the Championship, I think is a big ask. So unless they are clever with their loans, I don't really see them going out and splurging big on a striker, for example.
Fair enough. And I mean, it's worth remembering Adam Ida is there as an option, and maybe we could see Dean Smith have the impact with him as he did with the likes of Ollie Watkins in terms of making him a viable Premier League player at the level for Aston Villa. So, I mean, that is something that could well happen. Question for you, Luke, from the listeners is Dino good at using subs to change games if required?
Well, I mean, this was one, maybe a little bit of a sore spot for Villa fans. And it was at times that he maybe waited a little bit too long, Dean, to kind of impact games off the bench. And, you could argue last season it was due to a lack of strength in depth. You know, you looked outside the starting 11 and you think, is there anyone really there to impact the game? This season we saw much more of changes at half time, changes in terms of tactical changes to impact games, and it was a shame that they came in results which weren't good, and they were part of that losing run. For example, you need to look at Southampton and Arsenal, where Villa were. I'm going to be honest with you, they were pretty damn bad in the first half. But Dean Smith managed to make changes, and you can use that as a point, of evidence of him being, he still had players on his side, and he still was trying to get the best out of the team in terms that he brought players on, and Villa were much improved those second halves. Unfortunately, it's very much they had a mountain to climb at that point, but it was a real sticking point last season. This season we saw, with more players on the bench who could impact games, he was able to do that. So you could say that he's able to do it.
It's interesting sometimes when managers everything's going well. Folks say they're impossible, like they're not good at impacting games with substitutions. It was the exact same when Farke was doing well at Norwich City. It was like, why is he not making changes earlier? And it's like, yeah, he made the changes with 15 minutes to go. We scored 3 goals in the last 15 minutes. Come on. And it's funny how that seems to be levelled at managers when they're doing well. And then all of a sudden they start changing their methods, changing their approach. Look at Daniel Farke this year. And he's almost gone too far the other way, completely compromised the football and philosophy that he'd built up over the rest of his time here. And then it's obviously ended up with him out the door. So, I always think that's a really, really easy one for fans to level at a manager when things are going well. It's like, oh yeah, his subs aren't good enough. Yeah, that's maybe because we started the game and we were 2-0 up at half time or whatever, Another one for you, Connor, here is NCFC 1902 is asking, is Farke close to getting another job? He does say that he suspects Farke might take some time out. What's your understanding of what's going to be next for Daniel Farke? Do you know if he's got a preference for his next job and the kind of timeline on that?
Yeah, I don't know in terms of timeline and whatnot. I know he's going to take a few weeks to rest and have a break, and rightly so, after 4.5 years, which I would imagine have been very intense. The job he's done at Norwich City hasn't always been easy, particularly this season. So I'd imagine he'll take some time out. The way I view it is I think he'd get a better job in Germany than he would in England. To be honest, I think he could probably get a Bundesliga job, whereas I think in England he'd get a championship job, wouldn't he? Ultimately, so I would suspect, and it's just a feeling. Obviously, different options might come up, but I would be surprised if his next job wasn't in Germany, to be honest. Although that being said, if you were a top championship club at the moment, or a team in the championship that had aspirations of reaching the Premier League, Daniel Farke would be at the top of your list.
And he's going to have the pick at any championship job. That's the thing.
Absolutely. If I was Barnsley or Cardiff or anyone else looking for a manager, I think you'd at least pick up the phone and say, look, is he interested? Because what he's done there on a budget as well is going to be extremely appealing to lots of clubs. I could even see a move like, and I don't think it will happen, but Rangers, for example, I think they would do a lot worse than appoint someone like Daniel Farke. Yep. But I think ultimately it will be back in Germany and it will be in the Bundesliga, because I think his body of work over 4.5 years, he's not going to be defined. He's not going to be remembered for kind of these 10 games. It will be the body of work before that. And
I hope he chooses the right vehicle. That's the one thing I would say. I hope he gets his next choice of job right. He chooses the right Bundesliga jobs and he's going to be getting top.
Well, progression in Germany is pretty good as well, isn't it? Coaches progress up the pyramid better than they do in England, for example. So I think that's going to be an appealing element for him as well.
Yeah, totally. Just getting it back to Dean Smith, though, I think another aspect that I really like about bringing him in is the fact that he viably could make some players make that jump to playing for England, because he's done that at Aston Villa. He's made players that would traditionally, Tyrone Mings and Ollie Watkins don't traditionally get in England squads. I think Jack Grealish eventually breaks through just because of sheer talent, but those two are players that he's lifted to that viability and that level. I think he could do the same with some Norwich City players. Todd Cantwell could, in some universe, be an England player. Like, I don't know if he would be a regular, but he could get a handful of caps. Max Aarons, if it wasn't for the absolute strength that England have at right back, would be a viable contender to get in that squad, and I'm sure will get England caps in his career. I think having someone that can advance the careers of young English and young British players that we bring through. British and Irish, actually, if we're talking in Andrew Omobamidele's case, and Andrew Adam Ida's case. And I think having someone that can work with these young players and properly give them the tools that they need to be Premier League regulars, international selections, all of that stuff, it's just another thing that really excites me. I don't know about you, Connor.
Yeah, definitely. I think if I was someone like Max Aarons, who clearly has aspirations of playing for England, I think he's made that perfectly clear. Like you said, there's a lot of quality there in fullback positions England have generally. I think it's a shame in many ways that Norwich haven't got a young English centre-back at the moment, because a good handful of games and you probably end up in the England squad at the moment, as we spoke about earlier. Another one I've thrown into the mix, probably more thinking mid to long term, but Angus Gunn is an interesting one as well, because I would argue the quality of England's goalkeepers.
Scotland's viable as well.
Well,
if he doesn't get the England call up, like, he is viable for Scotland.
Yeah.
And once Craig Gordon goes, we're going to badly need a keeper.
Yeah, this is it. And I mean, I think beyond Jordan Pickford, obviously Aaron Ramsdale's done very well this season as well. But I don't think there's a huge body of really talented English goalkeepers like there was a few years ago. So that's one as well. Todd, like you mentioned, is another. So yeah, I think he's definitely got the ability to do that and to improve players. And as I said earlier, not only does he build football clubs, he improves players. He's done that at every single club he's been at. He adds value to players. That's what's going to make him so appealing to Norwich City.
And to Stuart Webber. That's absolutely what is going to make him appealing to Stuart Webber, because I know the way that he can look at these things. Just with the young players thing, look, what is it you think is Dean Smith's secret at managing to get Ollie Watkins an England call-up? Like, what is it he does that makes a player who, as I say, traditionally the likes of him and Mings, I don't see as playing for England, right? I mean, I might be wrong, and other people might think I'm judging it a bit harshly, but I don't think they're of the requisite level to automatically say, oh, they'll be in an England squad. I think Dean Smith's managerial acumen has managed to get them to that point. That's my reading of the situation. Let me know if you agree with that take. And secondly, what is it you think's his magic when it comes to working with young players?
I do agree with you. And for me, I think it's a mixture of trusting those players, you know, to do a job for you, but also playing to their strengths. You know, you look at Ollie Watkins, and you know, the season he had last year was really underpinned by the fact that Dean Smith trusted him to play in that lone striker role. And obviously, Ollie Watkins really took to that, but also playing to his strengths and saying, look, you know, there are going to be games where you don't have all of the ball. It's just going to be the case. Dean Smith always tried to do that with Villa. But when he said, look, when we don't have the ball, do what you do best. Go and press it. Go and make, you know, mistakes from other players and then capitalise on that. Likewise with Tyrone Mings, he trusted him. He brought him in on loan. Ultimately, you know, he was a player who Bournemouth were looking to ship out. And it worked, you know, fantastically for Bournemouth in the end, because they got, I think it's 26.5 million quid out of Villa for him. Wow. Because he went on loan. He was never going to play at Bournemouth. And then he was trusted in that central defence role, which he really wanted to play in. I know he started as a left back, but you know he couldn't get in at Bournemouth. And Dean Smith said, "No, look, I'll trust you. You be the man who leads the line and bring that leadership. And we'll play to your strengths. Look, we need left-sided centre half. We need someone who's willing to take risks and play out. And you know that's exactly what Tyrone Mings did. And you only need to look at other players, Ezri Konsa. Jack Grealish again is one which a name I've brought up so many times, and you kind of have to when you speak about Aston Villa and last season. You know, he trusted Jack Grealish. He said, "Look, you know, I know you're the best, most talented player in this squad. We want to be able to give you the ball. Just do what you do." And Jack really responded well to that. I mean, when Smith, you know, eventually got the sack at Villa, Jack Grealish was one of the players who spoke out. He's not even at the club anymore on Twitter, and he was one who obviously credits a lot of his success to him as well. So I think it's fairly obvious, you know, that he can bring the best out of these young players. But ultimately, I think it was a mix of trust and playing to them players' strengths. So it'll be exciting to see if he can do that with this Norwich squad. Yeah,
I really like that idea about the high press. And one of the things that I can remember from Dean Smith's tenure at Villa is how productively he used the coronavirus hiatus. Because the difference in the Aston Villa team between pre-project restart and post-project restart was more stark than any other team in the Premier League. It was a vast, vast difference. What do you see about his work over that period as being the most noteworthy aspects in terms of how he improved the team?
Well, I mean, it came at a really fortunate time for Villa because Dean Smith was he was on the brink at the time. Villa had just lost by 4 to Leicester. They looked lost in the Premier League. They were almost certain, candidates for relegation. But the one thing I'll say about Dean Smith, he never gets too high. He never panics. He never gets too high on a high and too low on a low. He is someone who is always, trying to keep a steady mind and a cool head. And he did just that in lockdown. It came, like I said, at a really fortunate time where it gave him a chance to kind of come together and figure out what was going wrong defensively, because that's where
they did improve dramatically, though, especially on that side of the ball as well. They just seemed to be a lot more compact, was my reading of it, after Project Restart, and it really benefited them.
That's it, and Dean Smith went in depth about that. Speaking to the press afterwards, he said, individual sessions with players over Zoom, and highlighting areas of the game which needed to improve, and how they could do that. And you saw that the fruits of that kind of came ripened after lockdown, and they came back in Project Restart, and they were phenomenal. Villa, they got the results they needed to, and they managed to stay in the Premier League, and obviously you only need to look at where the club have gone since then. That obviously they're a different model to Norwich in terms of the ownership and the money that they're willing to spend, but they've continued to grow in the Premier League. And like Connor mentioned before, he's a manager who pretty much always leaves a club in a much better place than it was found. You could levy that the last 6 months maybe wasn't true in Villa's circumstance, but there have been caveats that you can add to that. But ultimately, he came in with Villa 14th in the Championship, and he's left them 16th in the Premier League. I mean, no Villa fan was complaining about the results, and you only need to look at Brentford and Walsall to see what he did with them as well.
Yeah, I think that's the key thing. And we've got someone that I know can build the football club either from the Championship or the Premier League. Whereas I think if you go all in Frank Lampard, you're kind of hoping you stay up, because you're not entirely sure that he can be the right man in the Championship. Whereas I think Smith's track record says that he can definitely manage at a lower level. You mentioned Grant Hanley earlier on, Connor, as a potential candidate. Christoph Zimmerman's another one that you kind of wonder if his time's been now at Norwich City, given the litany of injuries and the fact that he was very much Farke's lieutenant. But Ed's asking, who will be the player to potentially lose out with Dean Smith coming in? Is there anyone who you think could become marginalised? And I'm not saying that, it's important to kind of make sure this is couched in the right way. This isn't saying the manager's going to automatically go out and try and not give someone game time or anything like that. But sometimes just the byproduct of various forces can end up with some player ending up in the fringes. Is there anyone you think could be potential candidates for that?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, they're already on the fringes, but even more so, I fear for Lucas Rupp, someone like that, Christoph Zimmerman. That kind of contingent of players who maybe are or were brought in by Daniel Farke and were Daniel Farke players. I do wonder, and this is what's going to be so intriguing about the next 3, 4, 5 weeks as Dean Smith really gets to know this squad and shapes it to how he wants it to be, which players are going to be included and which aren't. And there are some that are already pretty on the fringes that I really fear for, to be honest, at least in the short term. So I don't see any of I don't see Dean Smith coming in and making drastic changes to the starting 11. I think we'll just see tweaks stylistically and from a formation perspective, and players, as we spoke about earlier, Todd Cantwell, Billy Gilmore, Christos Solis, Milo Rashica, given a new lease of life. That's what I see more than anything. I see these players improving under Dean Smith rather than him chopping and changing, and someone who has been on maybe the fringes suddenly coming in from nowhere and playing a run of games. So it's going to be really interesting to see what a Dean Smith Norwich City side looks like and who it involves. I suppose players like Kenny McLean are interesting. I really rate Kenny McLean. I think Dean Smith will really rate Kenny McLean. I know he gets quite a bad rep sometimes. I don't think he's been as good as he has been for Norwich City.
He's not been at his best levels recently, and
I think he'd admit that.
But I think he gets a really unfair reputation with a lot of Norwich fans. When he's playing well, he's one of those players that works well within the collective. He's not someone that necessarily individually stands out. So he sometimes gets forgotten about. And then as soon as he has a couple of stray passes, it's like, oh, this guy's rubbish, And I think Kenny McLean gets a lot of unfair rap sometimes.
I'm really intrigued about someone like Ben Gibson, for example. It's going to be interesting to see what Dean Smith makes of him. We've already spoken about the centre-back options that Norwich have. Trying to think of sort of Pierre-Lace Malou, I think is another one. What's Dean Smith going to make of him? Is he going to have the energy in midfield that perhaps he wants him to have? A very good presser of the football. So again, given what Luke has said, that could be a big tick in Lace Malou's box. We just don't know how he's going to interpret or see it, or what he's going to want to try and implement with this Norwich side. So I fear for some who already aren't getting minutes and are on the fringes. But I don't see him coming in with a sledgehammer and smashing things up to a massive extent.
No, definitely not. Luke, on that, in that regard, is there anyone in particular you think will really, really fit the Dean Smith approach? Just on the flip side of that, of who might lose out, is there anyone you think from the outside looking in that's a Dean Smith player? He's going to really like him. We mentioned Rashica was a guy who was obviously really keen on. But of the other people that are already there in the Norwich City squad, is there anyone else you think, Smith's going to like him?
I think bringing it back to Cantwell and Gilmore, two real, players who can offer you legs in midfield and obviously a lot of running. And Dean Smith is, as I mentioned, he's someone who likes to play an expansive style. So anyone with, some forward thinking, ability on the ball, those are players that Dean Smith's going to enjoy playing with. But likewise, they've got to put a shift in. And you do wonder with someone like Cantwell. I mean, I'm from the outside looking in. I don't follow Norwich. I don't know the reasons behind why he was dropped and not featuring. But you do wonder why was Cantwell being dropped? Why was he not being fancied? Was it a lack of running, or is it something that's happened behind the scenes? I'm not. He
changed the system quite a bit, and it sort of made it quite hard to play Todd Cantwell, given the system change that he made earlier this season, which was to move to a far more defensive looking setup. And that was not the entirety of the reasoning, but it was definitely part of it. And I think there was just other aspects with him and Farke that they began to butt heads with. Maybe you can shed a wee bit of light in that corner. I don't know, just as to what exactly the story was there, because I think it was a story that kind of went untold. But I think reading between the lines, if he's playing for the under-23s, that says a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult situation where you've got a head coach coming out and telling you that a player's not fit, and a player coming out and telling you he is fit. So, I mean, who do you believe in that situation, right? So that's difficult. So there's clearly a difference of opinion. As Daniel Farke said, he may be fit, but is he fit enough to play a Premier League game of football? Which is something that we don't know, because we don't have access to the fitness data and his metrics. So only those two, and I'm sure everyone else in and around the club will know that. Clearly, there was a difference of opinion between the two. I don't think that'll come to a surprise as anyone for Todd Cantwell to be banished to the 23s, given Norwich City were bottom of the Premier League prior to that game before the international break, hadn't won a football match. I know people like Luke and people on the outside will be looking at it and saying that looks very odd. And I think Norwich fans were looking at it in the same way and thinking it's very odd. So
I think it's the success he had in the Premier League the last time that makes it even more stark, isn't it?
Yeah, this is it. When people think about that Norwich team 2 years ago, you think of Todd Cantwell because he was the face of it. He was the poster boy. He scored against Manchester City. He had that dance he did after goals. He had the hair. He's recognisable. Yep. Everyone knows Todd Cantwell. So it's a bit of an easy win for Dean Smith, really, to come in and throw Todd Cantwell straight into it. And then I guess his press conference before the game against Southampton is going to be really interesting, because if he comes out and says, "Yeah, Todd's probably not as fit as we'd like him to be," then we'll know the answer. If Todd Cantwell is straight back into the team, again, we will know the answer to the question. So it's going to be an interesting one. As I said, Todd Cantwell's back with the first team group, which he hasn't been for a few weeks. I'd be shocked if he wasn't playing at least some part against Southampton, but I'd fully expect him to be.
I think he'll be in the squad, which is a big difference. And he could be back in the starting 11. I was just going to come on to that next. Do you have a kind of a predicted starting 11 potentially that you think could be at least viable for the Southampton game?
Yeah.
When you go,
I've got
right in there. Good man.
I've got a rough idea in my head. I think it'll be Crawling goal. Again, this is probably dependent on injuries. Obviously, we don't know how Grant Hanley or Ozan Kabak are at the moment. So with those two fit, I think we'll see Aarons, Hanley, Kabak, Williams, which probably contradicts a little bit of what I said about Omar Bamadelli. But
Bamadelli and Gibson, who have both been great.
Yeah.
Bombed out.
That's just how I see it. But again, if those two aren't fit, then and Ben Gibson could easily come in given the way he likes to play football. Midfield three: Norman, McLean, Gilmore, and then a front three of Campbell, Rashica either side of Timu Pukki is kind of how I'm looking. I think really the centre back sort of positions are the ones that are majorly up for debate for me, because as you said, there's a really good argument for Omar Bamadelli coming in.
There's a good argument for every one of those players. Ozan Kabak's the best footballer. Grant Hanley's the leader. Ben Gibson's played really well and is the naturally left-sided one. And then Andrew Omar Bamadelli's a young player with bags and bags and bags of potential. So we're actually, from it being the area which has been a Norwich City weakness for a long, long time, I think, in terms of strength and depth, definitely. I look at that now, and I think you've got four defenders that you could argue, at their best anyway, are definitely viable Premier League players. And I don't know if I can remember the last time I would have said that about Norwich City in terms of four centre halves. Just a good question come in here from Ollie Middleton. He's asking who else could be in the backroom team alongside Dean Smith and Craig Shakespeare. He says he noticed they signed a set piece coach. I can't speak. Don't know what it is. Sunday night. A set piece coach this season. Is that Austin McPhee by any chance? Luke? Yeah. So is there any chance of Austin McPhee joining and maybe a fitness coach or people in the other sort of backroom staff roles? Who else do you expect might go with Smith?
Well, it's interesting. You bring Austin McPhee up. You'll have knowledge of him from his international work as well.
International work, and then obviously he's got a really strong body of work in Scotland over the piece.
Yeah. So he's someone who was highly touted when he was brought in, and Villa saw success in their set pieces immediately. Following that. The word from Villa is that Neil Cutler, who is a very trusted man to Dean Smith, is staying at Aston Villa, as is Austin McPhee and Aaron Danks, who was recently brought in as well. And
Neil Cutler, the goalkeeping coach. Is that right?
Yes, but he's much more than a goalkeeping coach. He's someone who's worked with Dean Smith before, and it's someone who's kind of got his fingers in every pie in terms of coaching. His official title is, goalkeeping coach, but he's someone who he was leaned upon a lot by Dean Smith, and Villa like him. And so far it sounds as if he's staying put. It'll be interesting to see what happens if Dean Smith is appointed and comes to Villa and says, "Look, I really want Neil," because Stephen Gerrard's also brought in a sizable backroom staff as well. So it might be a case of, are there too many cooks for this broth, and could Neil Cutler be allowed to leave? So that would be interesting. But McPhee and Danks, they were both brought in by the board at Villa, from what we understand. So it appears that they'll be looking to stay put, or Villa would like them to stay put. But Neil Cutler would be the big one, I think. There have been a couple of other coaches who have maybe left. I think word has it that there has been a fitness coach part. But Neil Cutler's a big name when you think of Dean Smith, outside of Craig Shakespeare and more recently Richard O'Kelly. But Richard O'Kelly was someone who departed Villa this summer.
Do you think he might come back to work with Smith at Norwich? Or is there any other names you think would be definitely going down to Norfolk?
Yeah, potentially. But it was one which was kind of... It was a strange situation because everyone really rated Richard O'Kelly quite highly, but I think there was an understanding between Smith and him that it was one which was going to end in terms of a partnership at Villa, and a lot has been said about JT as well. You won't be seeing John Terry go to Norwich. He's someone who that's
just never happening in a million years, is it? Like, even if they were still managerial number one and number two, John Terry still doesn't come to Villa. Norwich.
No, he's very much a man who fancies himself as number one, and he'll look for a number one job now. So yeah, the interesting
Not just
name
that, him at Norwich is just never fit. Like, just does not fit.
Yeah, it doesn't sound quite right, does it? But yeah, Neil Cutler's the one which you might want to put a paperclip on. As I said, Stephen Gerrard's brought in a sizable backroom staff. Neil Cutler is still at Villa, but Dean Smith obviously leans on him a lot and has worked with him at Walsall as well.
Superb stuff, lads. Anything else that you would kind of pick out as sort of key things to look out for in the coming sort of week or so, building up to that first game from now? That you really think are worth people looking into and maybe having a look at? I'll let you go first on it, Connor.
Yeah, well, I was just going to add on the backroom staff point, really, from what I can gather at the moment, Ed Wootton's going to stick around as goalkeeping coach, which is interesting given what Lucas said there. And I'm expecting the other positions to be internal promotions at this stage. But Norwich haven't ruled out.
On the fitness side, we've got a lot of good people at the football club. So I don't think there's any worrying in that regard.
No, absolutely not. Certainly initially it'll be internal promotions, and then they might have a look at a later stage. Like I said, if someone like Neil Cutler becomes available, then that might be something that they explore later down the line. But certainly initially it's Smith and Shakespeare, and they're going to be the only two come in certainly from the starting base.
And on that note, by the way, it's another aspect of Norwich City progressing people, because everyone looks at sort of academy players that get first team games, right? But that same methodology is used on the staff side as well. And it's the same reason Neil Adams has been appointed assistant sporting director. There's always got to be that succession plan and that, like, what comes next in the process type thinking. And yeah, that's why I'm definitely a fan of seeing things like that happening. Marielena Sataki getting her new job, all of that kind of stuff is all good evidence of the football club promoting from within, which I think can only be a good thing. But just on the kind of general note of sort of Dean Smith, Craig Shakespeare, looking forward to that first game. Luke, anything else you would say that we should kind of look out for in the week building up? What messaging do you expect him to give to the press and stuff when he sits down and is introduced as boss?
I think it'll be one of honesty from Dean. That's what you're going to get from him a lot of the time. He's someone who won't shirk a situation, and I can imagine that his first press conference will be a really interesting one. I'm really intrigued to see what he says, because the situation Norwich are in, I think a lot of people may have already written them off for relegation. So it'll be interesting to see his take on that and what we all know what the goal will be, but it'll be.
I think he'll be bullish, mate.
I agree. I think he sees enough in this squad to keep them up, and it'll be interesting to see what the situation is in terms of I'm sure the question will come up, like, if Norwich do go down, will you back yourself? And I'm sure he will do. To get the side back up, because at the moment you look at the Championship and you only need to look at this season to see just how weak a league it is, and if Norwich to go down, it's not the end of the world, because you'll have a lot of money in comparison to other clubs in that division, and you'll have a manager who obviously knows the division inside out, and we'll have a lot of quality players to call upon in that division. But I'm really interested to see just how he comes out. But you can imagine, I imagine you'll see a lot of honesty from Dean. There might be the odd frustration with injury updates, because he's not a manager who likes to reveal too much there. But on the whole, I think it's going to be a fantastic appointment for Norwich. I genuinely believe, when you look at Villa and the appointment they've made in Stephen Gerrard, there are genuine questions over whether that is an upgrade on Dean Smith, which says a lot about the man and a lot about the appointment that the club are making.
Some Norwich City fans are asking the same question about Daniel Farke and Dean Smith, Connor. I am wholeheartedly of the opinion that you needed to sack Farke because his time had run its course. And I think the club would be looking at relegation guaranteed if we hadn't made a managerial change, regardless of what that change had been, for number one. And my second point is, I think Dean Smith is wholeheartedly an upgrade on Daniel Farke, given the points that we've made earlier in the podcast about the fact he can make that next step with a Premier League club that's fighting relegation and get them to that mid-table stability, and then looking to build with an eye towards Europe, as opposed to looking behind you. Smith has done that. Farke hadn't. So that's why I would say he's definitely an upgrade. Although I know some Norwich City fans are asking that question.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think it is an upgrade. I think you only have to look at his body of work. I mean, he's kept a team in the Premier League for one. No Norwich manager has done that since Chris Hughton nearly a decade ago. So there's an argument to say he's an upgrade on the last 5 managers that Norwich City have had at the football club. So that's a massive tick. He's got more managerial games at this level than Frank Lampard, for example, who was his closest rival for this job by all accounts. I think, as we've spoken about at length, he ticks the boxes that Norwich City look for in a managerial candidate. And I think he will understand the situation that they're in and the way they operate as a football club. I think, as we said, he improves clubs, he builds clubs. Norwich City need building. They need building as a Premier League team. I see few people who are available at the moment who are more qualified than Dean Smith to do that. And I think he'll really relish this challenge as well. And I think he's someone who will get the best out of people, not just players, but staff as well. And I think he'll make Colney a really positive place to go and work, and a really productive place to go and work as well. So not to say that Daniel Farke didn't do any of those things, but like you say, sometimes a new voice and a realignment and a different take on things and a fresh impetus that him and Shakespeare will bring, the experience as well, the standards that they'll set. I think that could have a big impact on Norwich City, both in the short term and the mid term this season.
Yeah, Paul Freak's written in, he's written, Shakespeare could still well be a manager in his own right, so it's like having 2 managers. I think that's a really good point. And just given that we kind of balance this podcast to speak about both Dean Smith and Craig Shakespeare, Luke, what are your thoughts on what Shakespeare specifically can bring to the mix and really brings to that duo, just to kind of wrap things up here for us?
Well, like Dean Smith, he's someone who's well liked by players. So it's almost a double whammy there in terms of you've got 2 really likable coaches, and you know the point that was raised is a good one. I mean, he is essentially, you know, if you were going to highlight a manager who's in between, you know, actually being a first team coach and a manager, it would be someone like, you know, clubs inside out. He's got so many contacts, and he's someone that obviously gels well with Dean Smith. You only need to look at their body of work, you know, since they came together, just how successful Villa were.
There was that interesting period where he first came in to Villa, where the focus was very much on what Shakespeare could bring. Can you tell us a bit just about that period where the scrutiny was quite intense on it?
Yeah, it was. You know, he was someone who brought in, and people were, you know, maybe a little bit surprised to see him, you know, take that number 2. But he's just someone who knows, you know, how to coach players and get the best out of them. I think that was the thing that Dean Smith really wanted. He wanted, you know, someone with a bit more, you know, experience and maybe nous in that respect. And he got that in Craig Shakespeare, who's someone, like I said, who got the best out of players alongside Dean Smith. You know, people credit Dean Smith for what happened last season at Villa, but, you know, Craig Shakespeare was a massive part of that as well. So, you know, he's someone who like Dean, doesn't shirk responsibility, but is clearly very talented on that coaching pitch and can bring the best out of players, which is exactly what he did at Villa.
Well, that's what we're hoping that he's going to do at Norwich City as well. We've done our kind of 90-minute stint, gentlemen, or just about anyway. So I think we'll wrap it up there. But a lot to look forward to. And just to sum it up on a kind of emotional sort of basis to finish, Connor, obviously you've grown up watching Norwich City as well. So although you've got the journalistic scrutiny kind of bit, there's also the bit of you that's still a fan of the club. How are you feeling about the appointment as a supporter? Just to finish up.
Oh, it's an interesting question. I think probably like a lot of people, I think that at first you kind of think, oh, Dean Smith. That's kind of the thought that you have.
It's a journey, isn't it? It's been a journey.
I think it is. I think it is. And the more I see of him, the more I hear of him, the more I hear about him, sort of the more that I'm quite excited about it. I kind of I wrote a piece the other day, and it was kind of underwhelming or underrated. That was kind of the headline, and I was trying to answer that question a little bit because I think a lot of Norwich fans initially did feel quite underwhelmed by it. Yeah, I mean, as a fan, I feel quite excited about it now. I think if you'd have asked me 3 days ago, my view would have been a little bit different. And I've still got an element of doubt over, has he taken this job too quickly? And I think that's probably going to be something that's going to hang around unless he starts superbly. If he doesn't, then people are going to point at that, and it's going to be an easy stick to beat him with, right? But As I said, he's someone who has experience of the Premier League, has experience of keeping teams in the Premier League. That alone should be enough for Norwich City fans to get excited, irrespective of kind of everything else. But everything else is a bonus, I think.
Brilliant stuff. Luke, you have given your time free gratis tonight, so hopefully we'll get you a few Twitter followers out of it. If people want to follow you on Twitter, where can they find you, mate? And on any other social media that you want to plug?
Yeah, I'll just give my Twitter account. That's where I do, where I share the majority of the stuff that I do. So you can just find me at @lhatfield_star. So you'll see, random bits of content on Aston Villa, West Brom, the odd bit of Walsall, Shrewsbury Town, and Wolves now and then as well. So you'll find an eclectic mix of football content to digest there.
Very good stuff, mate. Charles Gray, just with a final thought on the pod, saying Shakespeare is the cherry on the Smith cake. I really like the way that's phrased. Nice work, Charles. Thanks to everyone for listening. People know where to find you, Connor, but I'll let you go for a quick plug anyway.
Yeah, CJ Southwell 1902 on Twitter, the Pinkin. That's where I am. If you want to find me, hopefully, I'm off for a week now, so you won't hear much from me anyway. But thereafter, hopefully, I can provide something that is worthwhile.
No, good stuff. Everyone knows pound for pound what Connor can deliver in terms of good local journalism, and I can tell you, having known Luke for mate, this scared me when I thought of it. We met in 2009. That's madness, isn't it?
That is worrying.
Crazy. So, I've known this man for over a decade. The quality of his work is unquestionably excellent, regardless of what sport it's on. So give Luke a follow, troops and troopettes. You'll probably already follow Connor, but if you're not, then sort it out. Thank you to everyone who has watched the podcast tonight, and to anyone who does subsequently listen to the audio version, which I will be packaging up tonight and probably putting out tomorrow morning. I have very much enjoyed the journey that I've been on to accepting Dean Smith as going to be the next Norwich City boss. That's been an enjoyable one. And thank you for living through the fun time Frankie frolics of last week with me. Anyone who's enjoyed that podcast and this one, thank you for doing so. If you're not aware of my work, you can find it at Hodgeythehack, Hodgey, the hack, all one word, on all social media. Hodge On Nodge you can find on your podcast players. And if you have enjoyed this podcast that you've been watching on YouTube tonight, then please do hit the bell and subscribe. I would be really grateful. I want to hit 1,000 subscribers because that's a whole new level of YouTube unlocked in. So try and help me to that end. Get your friends, your mum, your dad, whoever you want to do it. That's what we're wanting. I will be very grateful, and we'll send you a Christmas card. There's a promise. Nah, I don't send Christmas cards. That's a lie. Anyway, thank you very much to Connor at my left.
Thank you, mate. Cheers. Sorry. Yeah, there you go.
That's all right.
On the button.
Thank you very much to Luke, just below me.
No problem. Happy to do it.
And thank you very much to yourselves for listening. Dean Smith and Craig Shakespeare, a mid-November managerial dream on the Ball City.